So hello, I'll be presenting my topic, which is the effect of climate change on reptiles. So just a brief summary of what climate change actually is. It's just a long-term shift in the patterns of weather and temperature, or any sort of observable atmospheric condition changes we see in our atmosphere. And these are predominantly caused by the burning of fossil fuels in industries and factories, which is just human activities. And this leads to an increase in of greenhouse gases, which are namely methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide in our atmosphere. And these gases have a high potential for trapping heat. And so by doing so, the energy balance of our Earth is altered and it increases the global temperature. And this effect of the increase of global temperature because of the emission of additional greenhouse gases is known as the greenhouse effect. And it is the leading cause of climate change. And this causing climate change causes several other negative impacts on Earth's surface, like ocean acidification, rise of sea levels, melting of glaciers, loss of habitat for animals. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, which is the impact of this on species. And so species are just a group of individuals which are found in similar ecosystems, and they all have adaptations, which could be physical or behavioral, which they use to maintain their homeostasis, which is a stable state of the body, even in a variable environment. And this climate change actually has a deteriorating effect on their habitats because it changes the biotic and abiotic factors of their habitats. And thus, there may be a decline in population and they may have to relocate, or they may even go extinct. And so specifically, we're going to focus our look of climate change on reptiles, specifically the ones found in the saltwater ecosystems. And they're very diverse because they have to be on land, and they're terrestrial and they're aquatic because they spend time in water and then they come out on land some to lay eggs, most of them. And so therefore we can observe these impacts very carefully on these on the reptiles in saltwater ecosystems. And so saltwater or reptiles in general are what we call ectotherms, and endotherms are or species that are able to alter or control their own body temperature. So they have their own thermoregulation, whereas ectotherms are organisms that have to depend on the temperature of their surroundings to either cool or keep their body at a relatively fine heat so that their cellular functions work and function properly. And so reptiles are ectotherms, so they're really, really dependent on what the climate and surrounding atmosphere is around them. And so they, as I said, they have two types of adaptations like all other organisms. These are structural and behavioral. And structural is just any sort of specialized physical feature that helps it thrive, for example, for hunting or for, survival. And behavioral could be, migration or hibernation, or even something like instincts of judging or, assessing weather patterns. For example, detecting when it's time to start mating, or when it's time to move to a warmer condition, or when it's time to move from one place to another. These are all instinctive. And so these have all developed as over time because of evolutionary adaptation, and it helps them maintain their homeostasis. However, these are only developed for that certain atmospheric condition. And even though they change very slowly over time, evolution is able to keep up with that, and therefore animals are able to sustain. However, with global climate change, the increased concentrations of CO2 and the peak temperatures are so high that this change is taking place too quickly for evolutionary adaptation to stay on track with it. And therefore, its consequences are really pushing the animals' bodies to the maximum, and their habitats are really being lost at a really, really fast pace. And they have to either move or relocate or face extinction. And so observable evidence of this is, first of all, seen in turtles. So the figure above, I know it's not very, very clear, but it's a graph that shows increase or CO2 increase or CO2 and pH on Earth against time. So as we can see, atmospheric CO2 has increased over the years. And in the last, or in between 1990 and 2010, the pH of the oceans or seas have dropped by 0.05 on the pH scale. That means the oceans have become more acidic. And currently, 10 years later, it's become 0.1. And that means that in the last 30 years, we've had a 30% increase in the acidity of our oceans. And this process of ocean acidification is really, really detrimental because for turtles, they are they are secondary consumers which feed on the primary consumer corals. And coral reef ecosystems are deteriorate because they're made up of calcium carbonate or limestone, which undergoes a process known as fuzzing, which causes them to die. And so that's the food source of the turtles taken away. And secondly, the turtle's shell structure is made up of what we call individual scutes, and each scute is made up of a distinct protein called keratin. And this protein, keratin, is also insoluble in dilute acids, but when the oceans further acidify, the concentration of the acidity increases. Therefore, now the shells begin to also disintegrate, and they're more susceptible to predators because that's what the main function of the cells are. And we can also see the effects of climate change on reptilians like alligators and crocodiles, because they come out to lay their eggs in sometime between late June or mid-July. And their eggs, or the determination of the male, being the sex determination, so the male or female of the child that's being born, is determined by the temperature of the eggs, what the temperature around them is. So warmer temperatures produces females, and colder temperatures produces males. And so since global temperatures are increasing during this period, during the summer, we have peak high temperatures. The hatchings are disproportionate. The number of females being produced are much significantly higher than the number of males. And therefore, in future generations upcoming, there's not going to be enough males to mate with the females, and this would lead to a decline of population of crocodiles and alligators, and their population count would decrease strictly. And so this evidence seen, the consequences of climate change are very clear. One misconception that there is that climate change is only about increasing global temperatures. That's partly true, but it's also true that that's true for the summer months. In the winter months, we also have peak negative temperatures. So we have been observing really, really low temperatures, in northern countries like Canada, and some places where you never expect snow or negative temperatures, or they're experiencing that. This is all because of climate change. And so when this happens in the winter seasons, as I said, as reptiles are ectothermic, turtles experience severe hypothermia when they're in water, because when the temperature of water drops below 10 degrees, the cells of the turtle can no longer function, and it just goes into this sort of state called a shock. It's known as a cold stun, and the turtles go into that, and they're no longer able to function, and they die. And so just this year in February 2021, over 525 of turtles of an endangered species, had to be rescued in Texas and South Padre because of these cold stuns, and luckily they were saved. But that is happening, and it's continually growing all over the planet. And this is because the phenology and time that they spend hibernating now has to change, because it's getting so much colder, and the winters are also so much longer in these cases, that they have to spend a lot of time under muddy seabeds where their cellular processes are at a minimum, where they're conserving energy and they're hibernating so that they can actually sustain over that really cold period. And so that picture there shows a turtle hibernating right there. And excuse me. And since mating must occur at suitable temperatures for all reptiles, they must be able to, first of all, not only mate and also lay their eggs at suitable temperatures. With global climate change increasing peak temperatures, as shown in figure 1, that we've had a strict increase over the last century. There's a shortened window when these reptiles can actually produce. And so species like turtles and iguanas have to now face both intraspecific and interspecific competition, because they both mate at approximately the same time. And therefore, if they're all going to come onto the sandy beaches in that shorter period, there's going to be a large number of species trying to lay their eggs, and there's not going to be enough space. So there's competition for a finite resource. And that brings us to the look of the competitive exclusion principle, where two organisms in the same niche, which is in the same ecosystem, are competing for a similar finite resource, which in this case is the breeding ground. And the principle says that one will have a competitive advantage, not only against each other, but even within the species, they will be competing within each other. And they're going to drive out the weaker species, and they're going to drive them out of the niche and dominate them. And so these are the detrimental effects of climate change, and they really are moving fast on saltwater reptiles. And if we don't work fast enough to reverse or reduce our emissions or reverse these effects of climate change, then soon these ecosystems are going to be completely destroyed, and we would have a severe loss of biodiversity in the saltwater ecosystem, specifically towards reptiles and all other species as well. Thank you.